Hello, in this video we'll be looking at how to play the Black Death simulation. So this is a cooperative game, ideally for 4 players, but you can play it with as few as 2. Participants will play members of a family who will try and survive the Black Death. And that's why there are 4 players is the ideal, because the family consists of 4 people generally. There is a 5th character that can be added if you have someone come in late and every group is full. There are a couple of learning objectives. Of course, you can add your own, but there's 2 key ones. The first is to understand that a pandemic disease is not simply a biological event. It is also an economic and social event. And of course, this is looking at a historical disease, so there's also a historical aspect to it. In addition, the secondary learning objective is that making moral decisions is not easy. Key to this game, the students will have to make several decisions in which doing what many people would say is the right thing is definitely not the easy thing to do. This video will focus on how to set up the game. We'll give some explanations of how the game is played, as well as some a way to reflect on the game. And the reflection part is important. It's good to have the students discuss to try and make sense of what happened in their game. There will also be made available an actual play. That might take a while to put together, so if it's not up there, please feel free to contact me, and I'll get it up there as soon as I can. There will also be a video that is designed to be shown in the classroom, so that way that walks the students through all the steps. That way you don't have to completely run the game, right? A lot of the events, the lecture parts of it will be in that video, and you can actually play it in your classroom and just pause it as you help the students with any issues they have. So the materials we'll need, most are available on the website. Things like dice you'll need to get a hold of yourself. But in terms of what you, the instructor, will need during the game, there's the starvation cards. These should be printed out double-sided. And most things you'll want to print out double-sided. All the counters you'll want to print out double-sided. The event cards and the family cards don't need to be double-sided, neither does the board. But most things do want to be double-sided. So the starvation cards, you need 1 deck, or you could, if you have a large number of groups, I would suggest that you have 1 deck for each 2 to 3 groups, right? You can just shuffle them together. It's okay. If you want to simplify things, you've got plenty of things that you can print, then just give each group their own starvation card deck. You need enough divine favor cards, so you can give at least 1 to each group, but it's not a bad idea to maybe have at least 2 for each group that you'll hold on to. For the ghost cards, you need at least 1 for each group. Each group should have a D20 dice and something to roll it in if possible, or if they have a Chromebook or something, they can use a virtual dice roller. They need the game board. They need the family cards, and that's 4. There's a Bellefonte card. That's only, I would not give that to the students. That's only if you have someone come late and you already have all your groups are full. That's how you can allow a 5th person to play. So take out the Bellefonte cards, just give them the family cards. They also need 1 deck of event cards. For the coin markers, I would suggest that each group has 10 of the 1 soldo. A soldo is an Italian coin from this time period. 10 of the 5 soldo cards and 5 of the 10 soldo cards. And if you open this up, you'll see it's just a coin that has like a 10 or a 5 next to it. You don't have to count these out exactly. I mean, you can just give them like a bunch of them and then just keep some for yourself. And then if students run out, you give them more. This is kind of just a minimum. For the food markers, I was suggesting having 10 of the 5 breads and 10 of the 1 breads. Now, if you do need to save money, you don't have to print out so many things double-sided. But I do think it makes life a little bit easier if the coin markers, the food markers, if they are printed double-sided. The starvation cards, just so you can keep them separate from the event cards, because students, when they put things together, they might mix them up a little bit by accident. Those have a back, so I would print those double-sided as well, and the ghost cards as well. That's not a bad idea to also print those double-sided. So each person is a particular made up individual, right? These are not actual historical individuals, though the names are based on Italian names, and they are meant to be kind of believable, but they are made up. And each student will get a card. So there's 4 members of the family, so 4 cards. So ideally, your group would have 4 people in it. But like I said before, there is a 5th named Belfonte, and someone can take him if they come in late. And you can, of course, have people play multiple individuals, right? If you have a group of 2 people could play 2. If you have a group of 3, one person plays 2, the other each play their own individual. But the game does work much better if each person has their own individual card. And that's what the card would look like, right? So we have the person's name, we have an image, it says their position in the family, their age, their occupation. To try and make them a bit more believable, they have quirks. Now, there are the weekly earnings and weekly food consumption. Those are there for a couple of reasons. I've already calculated it, so you shouldn't actually need to refer to this during the game. But this is in there in case you want to kind of expand on it to make it possible for people to die in the middle of the game, for example. Right now, people can only die near the very end. Or if you want people to get sick earlier, if you want to expand the game, you could use this to do some math and maybe make the game a bit more challenging. But right now, that's just there for that kind of mathematical information. It isn't necessary in the game if you don't want to have it there. And one thing that's important to encourage the students is to try and act as they think this person would act, right? So, for example, parents should care about their children, right? Children should care about their parents. That would be normal. You know, the older sister and the younger brother might fight, but that doesn't mean that they would just abandon each other necessarily. So it's good to encourage students to think about that. If the family can't come up with a decision, then the father decides. This is 14th century Italy was a patriarchal culture. The father's name is Dado. So if you have a group that they can't make up a decision in time, then Dado gets the final choice. So if you look at the weekly earnings, the idea here, and I'll talk more about this momentarily, is that some is in food and other is in what's called soldo. So food is represented by food counters, and I'll talk more about those momentarily. Soldo are the coins that were used during this time period in Italy, and people contribute. These people are living in a town. Dado is actually a blacksmith, and you can see Fotina works sometimes as a seamstress. So she makes money, but she also helps in the family garden. So she also contributes food, right? So people, when they are developing their resources, they contribute 2 things. They contribute money and food, and they also consume food. And the only thing you can actually buy in this game is food, right? So why are there 2 resources then? Most of the income is money with only a little bit of food, and that's just meant to reflect reality. This is a family built around commerce and craftsmanship. Dado, right, is a blacksmith, but there is a garden that Fotina and Dulce, the mother, that they work in, so they have some food that way. And what's important is, as the Black Death develops, the price of food goes up. And as the price of food goes up, people are going to have trouble getting enough food to eat. And that's one thing this game is meant to simulate, right? Remember that disease is not just a biological event, it's also an economic event, and it's a social event. And I want them to get that economic in here. Now, again, that doesn't necessarily, the money, the price of food and so forth is not meant to reflect necessarily historical accuracy. It's meant just to show that, hey, when the disease gets going, food becomes more scarce and more expensive. It's harder to get food, and the less food you have, the more difficult it is for you to fight off a disease. So that's something we also want them to get out of here, or get out of this. Generally, I find sometimes students need to use calculators. That is fine if that's fine with you. I think it's not strictly necessary. You may just have to help them with some math, and we'll talk about that, how to do that later. So another important thing to keep in mind is what historians call historical contingency, what kind of regular people call luck. That exists. And there will be several times when you have to roll a dice to see how a decision goes. So sometimes the group will need to make a decision. they'll have to roll a dice to see what happens. And the dice that they will be a 20-sided dice. Now you can, on a Chromebook or something like that, if they're using that, you can find dice rollers there. And also, of course, you can have physical 20-sided dice, but we use a 20-sided dice, 1 to 20. And one thing in this game, a high roll is good. You always want to roll high. There's nothing where sometimes you want to roll low, sometimes you want to roll high. You always want to roll high. A higher roll is better than a low roll. So we'll be using D20s for that. There are different, in the event deck, there are Divine Providence cards, and there are other things that can give you Divine Providence cards. So one thing when I'm running these games in the classrooms, I tell students that, you're playing a particular person, and we assume for the sake of the game that what that person's worldview is true, right? So if we're playing a Buddhist game, like a game set in China or Japan where Buddhism was very important, we might have some Buddhist concepts in there, and those are assumed for the sake of the game to be true. So in this case, it's 14th century Italy. This is a very Catholic country, and so their basically Catholic beliefs are considered to be true for the mechanics within the game. So basically what a Divine Providence card is, somehow you did something that made God happy, and so that gives you an extra chance to get a better result. So if you get a Divine Providence card, if you look at the card, this allows you to roll that 20-sided dice one extra time, and you get to keep the higher roll, right? You get to keep the higher roll. So that's the idea there, is it gives you a little bit of an advantage. And if you are uncomfortable with this material in the classroom, you can take these cards out. You could come up with another substitute if you want to have people re-roll. Generally, no one has had any issues after, and that's, I think in part, it's just because I explain it. As I say, we're playing within the culture. I'm not making a statement about how things really are. We're just making a statement about the past, where people believe this is true. So for the mechanics, we're using it. But if you do remove it completely, it will make the game harder because you can't re-roll a dice. Another important element of this game, and don't worry, I know there's a lot of pieces. We'll go through this, and like I said, we'll also have a video about how to run it in the classroom, are event cards. So this is Dulce. This is another character in our game that people can be. And there are cards that you will draw, the students will draw each turn, and each group draws a card. And some of these cards are good, right? So a neighbor's son is courting a girl and buys a lot of roses from Dulce. Add 3 soldo to the lockbox, right? I'll show you the board momentarily, but the key thing is that's a good card. That gives you more money. Dulce got distracted by her roses and does not work enough in the garden. Remove 2 food from the pantry. So there's a positive card, there's a negative card. Again, this is meant to reflect historical contingency. Sometimes good things happen, sometimes bad things happen. People may make the right choice, but bad things may happen nevertheless. That's just how history works. So another element to this game is the board. So the students will each group will have a board where they keep track of materials, and I always start them off with a little bit of money and a little bit of food, both because it makes the game a little bit easier, but also just so they understand where things go. So they would place 2 food counters on the pantry. That's the box on the right. 2 soldo. Those are the coins. They would place those in the lock box. Food needed per week. And rather than make them count up all the cards, it's 17. Now, if Belfonte joins, you would want to look at his card and have that group add the fact that they need more food. And then there's family earnings per week. And that should start off as 4 food and 25 soldo. And so these here are counters, right? They have 2 food, 2 money. These are markers that just help you keep track, right? Okay, we know we need 4 food, we know we need 25 soldo, and we know we need 17 food per week. I'm sorry, we produce 4 food, we produce 25 soldo, 25 coins, and we produce 17, or we need 17 food per week. And these generally will not change. These will stay the same. It's just I want to add the extra numbers so that in case, if you add that Belfonte person, or so that you can maybe make some changes if you want. If you think the game is too hard or too easy, you can have people start at needing more food, or making more money and needing less food if you want to make it easier. But that is what the board looks like.
So to set up the board, the first things we do is we put our 2 food in the pantry, and then we place our soldo counters in the lockbox. And so you can see here, you'll note that I have more materials that are on the board, right? Because students will need to get those, right, to keep track of things. And then what's on the board is what they actually have. Then we need 17 food per week. And like I said, that's based on each family member requires a certain amount of food. I've already done the math. Um, so we put a food counter on the 17 to help us remember that. The family makes 25 soldo a week. So we put our little soldo counter there. And they also produce 4 food a week. So we put our food counter there. And so we've now set up our board. You don't have to have the family members here. I just have it there so you can see them, but each person would have them, so they would probably have them in a different place. This is the event deck. The starvation cards I just have here for convenience sake. You wouldn't need to give each group their own deck. You could just have people call when they need to draw from the starvation deck, which I'll explain later. Same thing with Divine Providence cards. You wouldn't actually give them a big stack of Divine Providence cards. You would just have them for yourself and then give it to them as they need them.
So in a general turn, the students will be given a question, which helps with review and gives additional resources. You can completely take this out if you want to. I find that it helps keep students engaged, and it's just a good way to review material. I will include my own questions, but you can certainly use different questions. So when the group is given a question, I just to keep things moving smoothly, I tell them they can answer on their own, and they're on the honor system as whether they got it right or not. So the groups aren't in competition with each other. They're not trying to each answer before the others do. As long as the group they discuss amongst themselves, you give them a few seconds, they get the answer right, then each group can get the prize, which is a soldo, a coin. So then the family would add food and soldo to the lockbox and pantry as described in the family earnings per week section on the board. And don't worry, I'll give you a concrete example of how this works momentarily. They would then draw an event and follow its instructions. So they would maybe add or take away food or soldo if an event card requires it, as we saw previously with Dolce's examples. They would then buy enough food until they have enough as required by the food needed per week section on the board. 1 soldo buys 1 food. And then I always give them a reminder, remember to actually pay your money. And one thing, just tell you as an instructor, the soldo food conversion rate will change, right? So the food will become more expensive over time. And that's in the PowerPoint. That will be in the instruction video. And then you would feed everyone by removing food counters from the pantry. And then students can, if they have money left over, they can buy more food and store it in the pantry. I always put a limit of 10 food, and I tell people, if you try and store too much food, some of it's going to spoil. Food doesn't last forever. But the key thing is, and one reason we use the counters is that if there's money left over, that they keep that money, food left over, they keep that. The reason this rule is important is that if people do too well at the beginning, they can have so much money that they don't really face any problems later on from the Black Death. If you don't have enough food, you'll have to draw starvation cards. I will talk about them later. But basically, the starvation cards make you weaker, make it harder to survive the Black Death. Now, there will be events that can change this all up, right? So this is something that's in every turn, but each turn will have something a little bit different to keep things interesting and to help with our learning objectives. And it's okay if students work a bit ahead. Like the first few times that you go through a turn, they will need more guidance, but eventually they'll start working ahead. That's why you can pause the video, though, to make sure everyone's caught up. You definitely want to be moving around the classroom, even if you're using the video, to make sure that each group knows what they're doing. I have found that people will not ask questions, unfortunately. I don't know if they're embarrassed, but if they're not sure what's going on, a lot of times they will just sit and just won't know what's going on. Or other times they think they're doing it right when they're actually doing it wrong. So you want to go through and check with each group. But generally, the first couple turns, you got to go step by step. Later on, you can kind of turn them loose because they'll know what to do. So this is an example of a question. So what I do, first of all, I announce that, hey, if you get this question right, the family gains a soldo counter, right? They just get extra money. It's good to have a prize for the game. It does make it a little bit easier, but it also, I find, keeps them engaged. Students like to win things, right? Who doesn't? And so what I do is I read the question, and then I will usually count to like 10 to myself, and then I'll give them the answer, right? So the idea is by reading the question, and then waiting a bit, that gives them plenty of time to talk in their group about what they think is the right answer, right? And that's the key thing, is each group can get it right. They're not competing against each other. Otherwise, I think that causes too much friction. It takes too much time. It's better just to let them all kind of do this. And then what I do is then I show them the next slide with the correct answer bolded. And then they say, okay, that's the right answer. We're going to go from there, right? Then they get to add the soldo themselves. You don't give it to them. They get to do it themselves. So, for example, week 1, we would say, okay, draw a card and follow its instructions. Add food and soldo to the lockbox and pantry, as described in the family earnings per week section on the board. Be sure to add or take away food or soldo if an event card requires it. Buy enough food until you have enough as required by the food needed per week section on the board. 1 soldo buys 1 food. Be sure to remove the soldo counters. Feed everyone by removing food counters from the pantry. Up to 10 food can be stored, so if you want, you can buy more food than you need. If you do that, remove the soldo counters and add the food counters. So our first step is to add food and soldo to the lockbox and pantry, as described in the family earnings per week. So we get 4 food. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if you wanted to, of course, for the sake of simplicity, you could take away 5 and use one of these as well. So that's why there's the multiple ones. Sometimes the students are really successful, they'll get too much. And then we have to add our 25 soldo. There's 20, 25. Now we need 17 food. We've got 6, so we need to buy 11 food. Food is 1 soldo for 1 food. So we need to subtract 11 soldo and then add our 11 food to make sure it's clear. Okay, good. We have enough food. We have 17 food. Then we feed everyone. So we take away all the food. And now at that point, we can say, you know what? Do we want more food or do we want to keep our money? Now, I don't tell students, but the best strategy is buy food. Buy as much food as you can. Always make sure you have the maximum of 10 stored. Oh, dang it. I forgot to do the other. Okay. Let's go back. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is add food and soldo to the lockbox and pantry as described in the family earnings per week. So we've got 4 food, right? So we add 4 food to the food box. And we make 25 soldo. So we add 25. See, things get pretty mixed up very quickly.
Then, now that we have our resources, before we feed the family, we draw a card. So sometimes the cards are very bad. Theft. A burglar broke into the house, remove 10 sodal from the lockbox, right? So if we follow through with that card, which we will, we lose our 10 soldo there. Now, the next step is to feed our family. So we look at our food needed. We need 17 food. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 food. 17 minus 6 is 11. So we need 11 food. Food is 1 soldo per 1 food. So we need to spend 11 soldo to get our 1 food. And this is sometimes where you may feel your students need a calculator. You may need to help them with that. So we then need to put down our 11 food. Notice that these are worth 5. And we have the same with soldo, 5 soldo, 1 soldo. There's also the 10 soldo. So we've got our 17 food, and we can take that now. Our next step is to feed everyone. So we take away our 17 food. And now, and the reason we do that is that we can then look and say, okay, we've now got 6 money. 6 soldo? Do we want to use that to buy more food or not? And I don't tell the students this, but they should do that. In general, you want to buy extra food because food prices will go up. They may figure that out, but I usually don't tell them. Now, we can't have more than 10 there, right? So we spent all our money. We've got our food. That's your basic turn right there.
So that was a simple week. That was the week 1 is the first week, so there's no special events. It's just to teach people the rules. Week 2 is a little bit more complex. So in that, the event is a friend of Dado, Mordecai Ben Simon, comes for a visit. He's a merchant. Sometimes he buys things from Dado. And he has heard rumors of a terrible disease ravaging faraway towns. And one thing I do want to note, and I'll talk about this more later, Mordecai Ben Simon is Jewish, right? Remember I said that this is taking place in 14th century Italy. It's very much a Catholic country, but there are Jewish people. And this goes to our talking about the Black Death as a social event, right? And that's going to be important. So then we just go through the instructions like we did before, right? The disease has not broken out yet in a way that impacts the town, so the food conversion rate stays the same. And so we do everything as normal. But then we don't just jump to week 3. I then describe something that happens. And this is one reason why I make that a video to make in class, because I can go through this in class. You don't have to if you don't want to. But I say your friend Mordecai Ben Simon went to run some errands as he's prepared to leave. And then suddenly there's a commotion outside. There's an angry mob chasing him. And you have to decide whether or not you're going to rescue him, right? Are you going to let him in and hide him? Are you going to ignore him? Or are you going to open the door and grab him and turn him over to the angry mob, right? So the students do have the ability to do what I think is clearly the wrong thing. But it's important in thinking about history. Okay, why might people do that? And the image on the right is some of the stereotypes of depicting Jewish people as basically being as being greedy. And unfortunately, these stereotypes existed, and is one reason why mobs would attack them. So, if you let Mordecai in your house, one family member rolls a d20, and they're looking to get at least a 15. And I tell them the number ahead of time, that they need to get a 15 or higher, so they can decide if they have a Divine Providence card, whether or not they want to re-roll it. If the score is at least 15, they successfully hide Mordecai, and they gain a Divine Providence card. So you would have those as a deck, and you would give them one. As you help Mordecai escape the town later on, he gives the family 5 soldo. If you fail, the angry mob breaks in, takes Mordecai and kills him, and steals half your food and soldo, rounded up, but the family gains a Divine Providence card. So it is possible for people to make the right choice, but to fail. And I think that's an important aspect of this game. If you do nothing, the angry mob seizes Mordecai and kills him. If you turn Mordecai over, the family receives 5 soldo from the leaders of the mob, which then kills him. And after this, I then go through and discuss the I give a little mini lecture, and this is an image from 14th century Germany, unfortunately, where in a town Jewish people were blamed for the Black Death and were massacred. But I explain, people didn't quite understand how the plague was spread. Uh, Jewish people were blamed oftentimes for the spread of the plague. One thing that led into this is that they were a distrusted minority whose members were often forced into unpopular professions, such as money lending. No one likes it. It's kind of a strange thing. You know this if you've ever loaned someone money. Is when you try and get it back, they are usually angry when you try and get your money back, and act like they're doing you a favor when you pay them. I'm sorry, when they pay you back. And unfortunately, that became a social issue where you had a group of easily identifiable people who were connected to an unpopular profession like money lending, and they were often forced to wear special clothing so it was easy to identify them. And I'll go more into detail for the video in the class that you would play in the class if you want to. But I talk about how that there were multiple such massacres. Oftentimes, Jewish people were kind of kidnapped and tortured into confessing that they had poisoned the wells or something like that. And this was criticized by the Pope and other Catholic leaders, but they were not powerful enough to stop it.
So we now have to decide what we're going to do that our friend Mordecai is in trouble. We are going to decide to do our best to help poor Mordecai. So we are going to try and hide him in the house. So I'm going to roll a dice. I rolled a 14, and you need a 15. Now, of course, we're going to pretend that I already had a Divine Providence card, so you can see how this mechanic works. So I'm going to give that to the instructor so I can roll again. And I got a 6. So I could keep the 14, but a 14 is not enough. So you'll recall that if you do try and hide him but fail, you get a Divine Providence card, since you did try, but the angry mob does break in and is going to steal half your food and half your soldo. So we have 10 food, so they take 5 food, and they are going to take 6 soldo. Or, I'm sorry, we had 6 soldo, so they are going to take 3. Now, if we would have gotten a 15 or higher, of course, we would have rescued our dear friend, and he would have given us a little bit of money. But unfortunately, for Mordecai and the family, that did not happen in this case. Now, you see, I used a bull. It's up to you. You can just give students dice, let them roll on the table. They will drop them. And I also tell them at the beginning, I say, like, if the dice hits the floor, you need to re-roll it. But sometimes you might have students also purposely roll the dice on the floor as an excuse to get up or something like that. I had a student teacher who tried that, who had a class that would do that. So just keep that in mind as a possible issue with dice. That's where maybe you just want to let them use their Chromebooks.
So another important element are these things called starvation cards. So if you have a week where you don't have enough food, you would draw one of these, right? You would draw one for each missing food. So if you were down 3 food, then you would draw this. And the person whose name is on the starvation card should keep that card, right? They're just going to hold on to it. Now, students will want to ask, oh, I'm sorry, I'll come back to that momentarily. Now, you can get rid of a starvation card if you eat an extra food in another week. This can only be done after everyone else has already eaten their required food for that week. So if the student should look at their card, and if it says that the person needs 4 food and they have a starvation card, if they eat 5 food the next week, they could give back their starvation card. But the idea here is that later on, the more starvation cards you have, the harder it is to survive the Black Death. So students will ask, well, what does this mean? You don't need to tell them that, right? We don't want to give up too much, but you want to tell the students that the card makes them feel weaker.
So we're not going to see how a starvation card would work. So let's say that you're in a situation where you have no money and 15 food. You need 17 food. So you would remove all your food. You would have a deficit of 2, right? You're missing 2 food. So in that case, then you need to draw 2 starvation cards. So let's draw one. Oops. And Dado got one. And let's draw another. And it was Pizzino, right? So the students would just keep a hold of those cards until something happens. Now, I during this video, I'll mention that you can just have one starvation card deck, and that works well. You could give each group a starvation card deck. I'm more inclined just to have you have one. But if you have a group that runs out of starvation cards, or if you run out as a class, just say, okay, then that's kind of the floor, right? There's no more people can starve, but that hopefully should not happen. But that is how you would deal with starvation. They just hold on to those cards, and then those will come into play later.
So what's going to happen is someone will become infected by the Black Death. And the way that that's determined is that everyone will roll what I call a health check. So they roll the 20-sided dice, each one of them will do that, and then they'll subtract their number of starvation cards. So for example, if you have a roll of 14 and you have 3 starvation cards, your modified roll would be an 11. You cannot use a Divine Providence card to re-roll this, right? Those are kind of owned by the family as a group. These, though, is each family member on their own. So the idea here is that the more you've starved, the less food you've been able to eat during the game, the more likely you are to be the one with the low roll. Whoever has the lowest number has fallen ill, right? And if you ever have a case where there's a tie, the people who tied, they would just re-roll, right? So if there's a case of a tie, the people who tied would have a re-roll. Now the family has to make a decision. They need to decide whether to place the person who fell ill in a separate room without food and water, place that person in the separate room and choose a family member to bring food and water to the sick person. And it's important that you clearly identify which family member is doing this. If multiple people want to do this, that's fine. But at least if you choose this option, at least one person has to be clearly identified as a family member who will be doing this. You then place that person, the last option is to place that person in a separate room and choose a family member to bring food and water and stays with them and takes care of them. So you'll notice, of course, that option has the most contact with the sick person. If the family cannot come to a consensus, as patriarch, Dado makes the final decision. I don't think I've ever been in a case where Dado had to step in. Usually the group comes to a consensus. But if you do have a group that's arguing that can't make up their mind, Dado is the one that decides to make up their mind. So let's say that for the sake of our an example, Pizzino has the lowest number, right? Pizzino falls ill, and then Dolce will bring him food and water and takes care of him. They decide to do the most dangerous option, right? They're going to do the most dangerous option. So does the sick person survive, right? How do you figure that out? So the sick person would roll a d20 and subtract the number of starvation cards they have, and you'd remember the total. If that sick person was put in a separate room, alone without food and water, you would subtract 10 from the total. If you have a negative number, just consider it a 0. If you're put in a separate room alone, but someone brought you food and water, subtract 5 from the total. If you're brought food and water and someone takes care of you, add 3 to the total. So in other words, the more care you got, the more likely you were to be able to survive. If you had at least 14 or more, you survived. If you had less than 14, you died. A Divine Providence card can be used to reroll. And make sure if you do reroll that you do go through this whole process above to modify your roll. And then I tell the students, if you die, your instructor has a special card for you.
So now we're going to see if Pizzino is going to survive the Black Death. So he is ill. He has 3 starvation cards. He's been weakened by hunger, so we'll roll a dice, and then we will subtract 3. Okay, he rolled a 13. You subtract 3, so his modified roll is a 10. Now remember, Dolce, his loving mother, was willing to come and take care of him, so that actually gives him a bonus of 3. So that makes it a 13, right? We went down from 13 to 10 because he had 3 of these cards. But then because she took care of him and brought him food and water, he gets +3. Cancel each other out. He gets a 13. That's too low, though. So at this point, we'll say, okay, they've got a Divine Providence card. They're going to spend it to see if Pizzino can survive. And a 4 is less. -3 is a 1, +3 is a 4. So he does not survive. However, he is going to then get the Ghost card. So he can use that certainly to assist a family member if he so chooses. And of course, logically, he might be willing to assist Dolce in that regard.
So then now we had to figure out, did any other family members catch the plague? So anyone who is not sick rolls a d20 and subtracts the number of starvation cards they have. Remember that total. If you brought food and water but did not stay with the sick family member, subtract 5 from your total. If you brought food and water and stayed with your sick family member, subtract 10 from your total. If you had a total of 14 or more, you stayed healthy. A Divine Providence card can be used to re-roll. And then I asked the students how many became ill. And so you can see here, the more contact you had with people, the more likely you are to become sick, right? So this is a key learning objective is people were scared of disease. They knew that the right thing to do would be to take care of their family member, but they were also frightened that they would get sick. And there was a good reason why they were afraid, because that is indeed how the Black Death works. So then so basically, the people who helped the least had the best chance to be able to survive this. Now, do remember, you can use the Ghost card if the student, if there was a student who really just didn't care about the person who died. This is where they could get revenge, or they could try and help, because they could force them to re-roll and maybe get sick.
So now we have to see, does poor Dolce, right? Poor Pizzino died. So we're going to remove him for now. He's been replaced by the Ghost card. We're going to see if Dolce is going to come down with the plague. Now, fortunately, Dolce does not have any starvation cards, so she doesn't need to worry about that. However, she did have lots of contact with Pizzino, and that gives her a modifier of -10, right? Modifier of -10. So it's very, very difficult for her to not get the plague. So we rolled a 4. 4 minus 10 is -6. So she would not be able to get there. And of course, mathematically, right, you would need to get like a 24 to not get the plague in this circumstance. So it's really impossible for her not to get sick. And that was on purpose. So she's going to get sick, unfortunately, but it really could not be helped. Pizzino, he could have used his Ghost card to stop her from getting sick, but that would actually be a bad idea, because if she re-rolls, she can't possibly get a high enough roll. So she is going to become ill.
So now we have to try and see, of the people who got sick, right, those who raised their hands, did they survive? So to keep things simple, I just had them roll d20 and subtract the number of starvation cards you have. If you have at least a 14 or more, you survived. If you had less than 14, you die. I don't deal with that. Do people bring you food or not, simply to keep things simple. Otherwise, you know, here we're kind of sacrificing some realism just to keep the game moving. And if there's any Divine Providence cards, they can be used to re-roll. And then I like to ask at the end, well, who died and who survived?
So now we're going to see, is Dolce able to survive, right? That's the big question. Is she going to survive? And to see if she does, she needs to roll the 20-sided dice and get at least a 14. She would again subtract starvation cards. She does not have any starvation cards, so it would just be straight what she rolls. So let's roll and see what happens. So she rolled a 16, which means that she survives. She gets the plague, but she's able to survive it. Now, if let's say that instead of a 16, her first roll had been, that's actually a good roll. Let's say her first roll was a 5 instead of a 16. She would have died. We don't have any Divine Providence cards, but Pizzino is a ghost, and so Pizzino can allow her to re-roll and keep the better number if he wants. And if she got a 16, then she would have survived. So Dolce, she sacrificed to take care of her son. Unfortunately, it didn't work for him, but at least her son's ghost did prevent, in that case, would have prevented her from becoming, or from getting sick and dying.
So, in terms of reflections on the game, there are different questions you can ask, and you could give them a sheet and have them fill it out and talk about it as a group, and then talk about it as a small group, and then talk about it as a big group using their sheet. You could have people do presentations. You could give students different questions. I'm just going to give you some questions I like to use. How was the Black Death a biological event according to the simulation? How was the Black Death an economic event according to the simulation? How was the Black Death a social event according to the simulation? What did you do when the mob wanted to capture and kill Mordecai? Why did your family act in that way? What did you do and your group do when someone became ill with the Black Death? Why did people act in that way? How well did things go for you and your family? Why do you think it went that way? Did the mechanics work? And that's the dice rolling and things like that. If not, which mechanic did not seem to work and how could it be fixed? What was your least favorite part, if any, of the simulation? What was your favorite part, if any, of the simulation? Do you have any other comments you would like to add? So like I said, you can use this in a variety of ways. You can make this big group, small group. You can add questions, revise questions, eliminate questions, whatever you think works best for your class. Now, if you're still, I'm sorry. So there are some issues to consider when running this game. One thing, sometimes it's hard to get people to play in character, that they forget that they are a family. And it's good just to remind them of that sometimes, if they seem to be getting too much goofiness. It's sometimes hard to get people to take the moral choices seriously. One thing that it's important to keep in mind, when we are confronted with an awkward or uncomfortable situation, to diffuse the tension, we often make a joke. And so sometimes that's what students will do, especially when we're with the situation with Mordecai. And it's good just to be aware of that and to keep in mind that a lot of times, I would say the vast majority of the time, and I've never actually had anyone really, really mean it, but they'll make a joke there. And it's just good to be aware of that and to keep in mind that they're probably doing it just because they feel awkward. And so you can kind of diffuse that rather than getting upset with them. You can just say, hey, remember, let's take this seriously, or something like that. And so there is a possibility of inappropriate comments. It's just something to think about with the students you have and just to be ready for that. One thing I think is interesting is that if the groups that are loud in their discussions tend to impact other people. So if I have a group that says, oh, we don't care about Mordecai, and they say it very loudly, and they're like, yeah, it's fine if a mob kills him, other groups are more likely to do that. On the other hand, if you have a group that says, no, we need to help Mordecai, then other groups are more likely to do that. And that's just something to kind of look at. But hopefully this is interesting and you'll be able to use it. Like I said, if you're still confused about things, don't worry, because I'm also going to have that video that you will use in the classroom if you so choose. Now you could watch it and just run it in the classroom, or you can use it to play in the classroom.